Yes, Your Honor. May I first make appearances for court?
Sure.
Good morning. My name is Connor Mooney, along with my co-counsel, Thomas Ford. Good morning, Your Honor.
Good morning.
And Haley Gold.
Good morning, Your Honor. Good morning.
We will be representing the people of the state of Illinois. Now, at this point in time, we would ask, may we tender documents to the bench for the court's reference that the opposing counsel has seen. They include an example of the Midland case law, applicable provisions for the Midland Penal Code, the jury instructions for entrapment, and the stipulations, along with the order on motion to strike experts' testimony.
You may approach and tender. Any objection?
No, Your Honor.
Anything further?
Also, since this is the first time we've worked in this court, we'd like to know your preferences on walking about the well.
You may move freely in the well.
Thank you. And where should witnesses direct their statements?
To judge as jury.
Okay.
Anything further?
May we make appearances before the court?
You may.
Hello, my name is Julissa Harris, and along with my co-counsel Christopher Grant
Good morning, Your Honor.
Good morning.
and Cameron Lillard.
Good morning, Your Honor.
Good morning.
We will be representing the defendants in this case, Avery Bancroft. Now, we have the special instructions to tender before you, and also we would like to move Defense A into evidence at this time. Defense A is a transcript of a conversation that happened on March 31st. And pursuant to the stipulations, all objections have been already overruled.
Is that true, Counselor?
No.
Okay. You may approach and tender. And the document will be admitted.
And at this time, we would like to invoke Rule 615, the constructive sequestration of all witnesses, except for a party representative. Our party representative for today's trial will be Avery Bancroft.
Any objections?
No objection.
Does the prosecution have any party representative?
No.
Okay, then that's so granted.
And lastly, would you like us to ask for permission before we approach opposing counsel, the bench, or the witness?
Please ask permission to approach the bench. You don't have to ask permission to approach opposing counsel, but you do need to ask permission if the witness is not your party and is the opponent's party. Your witnesses you can approach freely.
Okay, and with that, we are ready to proceed.
Okay, opening statement for the prosecution.
May I proceed?
You may.
Opposing counsel, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, ladies of the jury. My name is Thomas Accord, and I am representing the people in the case of State of Midlands v. Avery Bancroft. In the fall of 2014, it was announced that the Midlands Gambling Commission would issue a license to open a new casino in the state of Midlands. On the 16th of April 2015, Avery Bancroft, the defendant, bribed Chase Covington, the chair of the Midlands Gambling Commission. The defendant bribed Mr. Covington in order to secure Mr. Covington's vote on the defendant's proposal to open a new casino in the state of Midlands. The defendant, were she to obtain this license, would be the first person in the state of Midlands to own 2 casinos. The defendant, over the course of events we will talk about today, exhibited a certain set of traits, namely drive, determination, and desire. These traits will show that the defendant was predisposed to bribe Mr. Covington. Ladies of the jury, your task today is not to determine whether or not a bribe occurred, but to determine whether or not the defendant was entrapped by the actions of law enforcement. What this means is that would the defendant have done this without the interference from Officer Keenan, or Midland State Police Department informant Corey Hyde. My co-counsel and I must show this beyond a reasonable doubt. This means that the only reasonable explanation for what happened would be that the defendant was predisposed to engage in a bribery scheme. If you cannot find a doubt based upon reason and the facts presented here today, then the defendant must be found guilty. The prosecution will call 3 witnesses today. The first is Mr. Corey Hyde, the executive assistant to the defendant. Mr. Hyde acted as a police informant after he was approached by undercover officer Mickey Keenan of the Midland State Police Department. Through the examination of Mr. Hyde, it will be shown that even after being approached by Officer Keenan, Mr. Hyde continued to act in a normal manner towards the defendant and did not pressure the defendant into taking a bribe. Giving a bribe. The second witness that the prosecution will call is Mr. Daniel Hoy, head of security at the Black Bear Casino. Mr. Hoy will show that the defendant actively sought out secrecy in meeting with Mr. Covington. The third witness that the prosecution will call is Dr. F. Reese Warren, a linguistics expert, who will show that by his analysis, he could not determine whether or not entrapment had occurred. I say again, the defendant was not entrapped. At the end of the trial today, my co-counsel, Ms. Haley Gold, will recap the prosecution's position and show that the only reasonable explanation for what happened was that the defendant was predisposed to give a bribe based on her drive, determination, and desire to do so. Because of these things, the defendant was not entrapped and must be found guilty. Thank you.
Cameron Wheeler for the defense, Your Honor. May I proceed?
You may.
May it please the court. Your Honors, opposing counsel, members of the jury, Mickey Keenan forced Avery Bancroft's hand. You see, this is the story about how one police officer, Mickey Keenan, wanted to make it big. He was looking for his golden goose. And with the new casino license coming into play, that presented the perfect opportunity for Officer Keenan to go undercover and create his own golden goose. The problem was that there was no golden goose. Mickey Keenan had to create his own. And the perfect target for that was our defendant, Miss Avery Bancroft. You see, Avery Bancroft already owned one casino, the Black Bear, but was submitting a proposal for a second casino within the state of Midlands. This gave Mickey Keenan the opportunity to go undercover and work and flip Avery Bancroft's assistant, Corey Hyde, turning Hyde into an informant for the state. And through a series of meetings and emails and conversations, Mickey Keenan subtly coerced Avery Bancroft into making a bribe towards Chase Covington in order to swing the vote her way. We as the defendant are mounting an affirmative defense in today's case because Mickey Keenan forced Avery Bancroft to make that bribe. And in mounting an affirmative defense, we are assuming our own burden of proof. And we have to prove to you by a preponderance of the evidence, which means 50% and a single feather's weight, that Avery Bancroft would not have normally committed this crime of bribery, and that she was induced into this criminal activity by the state and its agent, Mickey Keenan. And if by the end of today's trial you find that we have provided you with that single feather's weight, you must acquit Miss Avery Bancroft of all charges. And in order to provide you with that single feather's weight, we will be calling 3 witnesses to the stand before you. First, we will be calling Allie Thomas, a blackjack dealer at Miss Avery Bancroft's casino, who will tell you what it was like working for Miss Bancroft and how Miss Bancroft ran a clean, legitimate business. Next, we will call Dr. J.D. Lurian, who was prior, who will run you through how Mickey Keenan breached protocols and used very coercive tactics in his under investigation, tactics that will be shown to induce criminal activity. And finally, we will call the defendant, Miss Avery Bancroft, to the stand, who will tell you how she felt forced to make this bribe, how she was coerced by Mickey Keenan, and subsequently her own executive assistant, Corey Hyde, who is now working for the state. And finally, at the end of today's trial, my co-counsel, Miss Jaleesa Harris, will stand before you and ask that you acquit Miss Bancroft of all charges because her hand was forced by Mickey Keenan. Thank you, Your Honor.
Your Honor, at this time, prosecution would like to call Corey Hyde to stand.
Corey Hyde?
Now, can you please state your name and your profession?
My name is Corey Hyde, and I work as Avery Bancroft's executive assistant at the Black Bear.
How are you involved in today's case?
I worked as an informant under Mickey Keenan and assisted in his investigation to catch Avery Bancroft driving Chase Covington.
How did you come to work in Midlands?
Before I lived in Midlands, I tried to make it in Vegas, but it really wasn't for me. I've yet to find my calling in life, and I really just go wherever the wind happens to take me.
So, as Avery Bancroft's executive assistant, what do you do?
I make sure that her life doesn't fall apart. I get everything that she needs, from the perfume that she likes to making sure that she isn't late to her business meetings. I make sure all of that gets done.
Now, earlier you said you were a police informant. Can you go further into that?
Well, it all started with a proposal that I assisted Avery Bancroft in submitting to the Midlands Gambling Commission. Avery Bancroft already owned a casino, and she wanted another one. So we submitted a proposal to the commission, but they only give out a new commission about once every decade. And I got a phone call from Mickey Keenan detailing that he wanted to meet with me to discuss his proposal. It was at that time that I found out Mickey Keenan was a cop.
How did you learn this?
Well, when I met with Keenan, we first started discussing the proposal, but after that he started talking about gambling violations, and I had no clue what he was talking about. I found out he was a cop when he put his badge on the table, and it was at that time that he asked me to assist him in his investigation to catch Avery Bancroft driving Chase Covington, one of the chairs in the Midlands Gambling Commission, who would ultimately vote on whether or not the proposal would be approved.
And how did you go about helping?
I just did my normal job. I set up meetings between Bancroft and Keenan at first, but then later set up meetings between Bancroft, Keenan, and Covington. I also sat in on all of these meetings.
When was the first meeting?
The first meeting was March 31st, 2015, and it was between Keenan and Bancroft.
What occurred during this meeting?
Well, Keenan had me wear a wire for the meeting to record the conversation, and the meeting started with Keenan and Bancroft talking about the proposal, but then Bancroft said that she would do whatever was possible to get the proposal, she would do whatever she needed to do to get the proposal through.
What happened next?
What happened next? Avery, well, after that meeting, I set up a meeting between,
What was there any follow-up to this meeting?
during the follow-up. Well, because because Bancroft had expressed interest, I set up a meeting I called Covington to set up the next meeting because it was clear that Bancroft wanted to meet with him. And when I called Covington, Covington was already expecting Covington answered directly, which at first surprised me because I was surprised that I didn't get his assistant. And he said, Bancroft, I thought I'd be hearing from you again.
Was there anything else startling about this conversation?
It really surprised me because it wasn't to my knowledge that Avery Bancroft and Chase Covington had already been talking.
What did you say, Covington?
I told Covington that this was Corey Hyde speaking and that Avery Bancroft had wanted to meet to discuss their proposal. Covington replied that that was exactly what he had been expecting. And we then proceeded to set up a meeting for April 13th.
Okay. Can you go further into the details of this meeting?
Well, I was sitting at a meeting between Avery Bancroft and Danny Boyd, head of security at the Blackberry. They were planning on doing a pat-down for this meeting.
Did you do any preparation for this pat-down?
I contacted Keenan because I wore a wire to the previous meeting, and that was something that I couldn't do at this meeting.
How did the pat-down go?
Well, we were thoroughly screened and even had our cell phones taken. This sort of thing never happened at our regular business meetings.
Once you entered the room, what happened?
Once I entered the room, Keenan first ordered room service, then Covington asked Bancroft, "What do you have for me?" Bancroft tried to give a variation of the pitch for his proposal, but it was obvious that it wasn't working, and Covington replied that that's all well and good. I like a nice casino as much as anybody, but what do you have for me?
How did Bancroft respond?
I couldn't believe that Bancroft was still playing dumb. I mean, Bancroft had us all patted down and even had the room swept. It was at that point that Mickey Keenan said, "You need to do something to make this more appealing to Covington." And Covington said he would need at least 250,000 reasons to go for Bancroft's proposal.
Did Bancroft have 250,000 reasons?
Bancroft said it was a lot, but that Bancroft would see what he could do, or she could do, excuse me.
How did Keenan react?
Keenan react?
What was he doing in this entire situation?
Well, after that, I went to the bathroom, and it was when I came out that I saw that room service was at the door. And Keenan went up to enter the door to let room service in, and it was at that point that I saw that Covington looked at Bancroft, held up his briefcase, said he wanted another one, and Bancroft then seemed to nod and handed Covington her business card.
Okay. And was that the conclusion of the meeting?
Well, room service walked into the room, and it was at that point that Covington got annoyed and left, and that was followed by everyone else that were leaving the meeting.
So now, you mentioned a briefcase. Can you go further into that?
Well, because I saw that Covington wanted Bancroft to get the briefcase, I ordered the briefcase for Bancroft off of TobySupplies.com.
Okay. Now, this briefcase. Can you give me any more details? Who ended up with it? What did Bancroft do with it? Did Covington do it?
Well, on April 16th, I walked into Bancroft's office. I saw Avery Bancroft putting stacks of bills in the briefcase out of the room.
And do you have any idea how much money was put in the briefcase?
I saw her put over $200,000 in the briefcase.
You have no further questions.
approach.
Granted.
So, you are Avery Bancroft's executive assistant,
Yes, I am.
and one of your jobs as his executive assistant is to set up meetings for him.
Yes, I do set meetings for her.
So, you got a call from Mickey Keenan one day, set up a meeting between just the two of you on March the 1st.
Yes, them and me were at that meeting.
So in this meeting, that's when you found out that Mickey Keenan was really a cop.
Sorry. Yes, that was. He put his badge on the table.
Mickey Keenan implied to you that he had evidence that you violated gambling regulations.
He said that I hadn't done anything wrong, but he did say that.
So he made false allegations against you.
I ultimately decided to help him because I thought helping the police was the right thing to do.
Okay. So you said in your statement that Mickey Keenan wanted the cash. Bancroft brought him a check and then was gambling commission.
Yes.
So Keenan enlisted in your help to set up meetings between yourself, him, Bancroft, and Covington.
Yes.
The first meeting that Keenan asked you to set up took place April the 13th.
With Covington and yes.
So in this April 13th meeting, in your direct examination, you said that Keenan told Bancroft that he needed to make something, that he needed to make the deal more appealing, or else the deal wasn't going to get done.
Sweeten the pot, yes.
No further questions.
Any redirect? No. Thank you, Mr. Hyde. You're excused.
Prosecution would like to call Mr. Daniel White.
Mr. Hyde?
Would you please state your name?
I am Daniel Hoy.
What is your occupation, Mr. White?
I am head of security at the Black Bear Casino.
And what did you do before you were head of security at the Black Bear?
For 4 years, I worked for a celebrity by the name of John Legend. And before that, I was in Special Forces for 10 years until I was offered a better job of pay from Avery Bancroft.
And what does your present job with Ms. Bancroft entail?
I supervise 30 different employees. I meet with Bancroft monthly in order to discuss her meetings, and I advise Bancroft on security issues in Black Bear Casino.
With the time that you've spent monitoring the security at the Black Bear, have you ever noticed any flaws?
Yes, there are blind spots, like all casinos, but there are specific blind spots. Yeah.
Could you describe these blind spots for the jury?
There are blind spots at the center table, and you cannot visibly see
I'm sorry, what is the center table?
the center table in the VIP room of Black Bear Casino. You cannot see the people's backs who are standing at the center table of Black Bear Casino.
And did you mention this flaw to the defendant?
Yes, I did, but she said that those were her own personal tables, and they were restricted only to high roller access.
All right, let's move on. Did you receive an email from the defendant on the 12th of April of this year?
Yes.
Would you recognize a copy of that email if I were to show you one today in court?
Yes, I would.
Would you like to? What have I just handed you, Mr. White?
You handed me email Bancroft sent me on April 12th.
Is this a fair and accurate copy of the email that you received on that day?
Yes, it is.
Your Honor, prosecution moves to admit Exhibit 1 into evidence.
Any objections?
No, Your Honor.
So admitted.
Mr. Hoy, could you please explain what the defendant said to you in this email?
So basically, the day before April 13th, I was supposed to take security protocol to extra extent in room 312 of the hotel suite in the Black Bear Casino.
And the next day prior to the meeting, how did you carry out those requests?
So I arrived 2 hours early and checked to make sure that there were no obvious safety infringements and security flaws within the room. After that, I left the room and took my position outside and waited for the individuals to arrive.
Let's move on. When was the next time you had any contact with the defendant?
I had contact with her on April 15th.
And what happened during that interaction?
She arrived in my office.
What did she say to you?
She said she was wondering about the blind spots within the VIP room.
And what did you say to her?
I brought out a map and showed her specifically where the blind spots were.
Would you recognize a copy of this map if I were to show you one in court today?
Yes, I would.
Mr. Hoy, what have I just handed you?
You've handed me a map of the VIP room within the Black Bear Casino.
Is this a fair and accurate representation of that map?
Yes.
Your Honor, prosecution moves to admit Exhibit 2 into evidence.
Any objections?
Yes, Your Honor. Defense would like to object to relevance.
Response?
If I may make an offer of proof,
You may.
Mr. Hoy will explain the blind spots shown on that map to the jury.
Your Honor, if I may.
Yes.
Whether or not there were blind spots in the VIP room has no relevance in today's case of whether or not Avery Bancroft was legally entrapped into committing a bribe with Chase Covington.
Response on those grounds?
If I may make another offer of proof,
You may.
Mr. Hoy will explain how he witnessed the defendant and Mr. Covington walk into the blind spots after he had alerted the defendant of their existence.
Your response on those grounds?
Yes, Your Honor. That still offers no, or renders no matter in dispute in today's case. More probable than not, just the fact that they were sitting in the blind spot. It offers nothing in terms of entrapment.
Relevance is a low bar, counsel, so I'm going to allow it. Your objection is overruled and the document
Yes,
is
Your Honor.
let it.
Mr. Hoy, would you please explain this map to the jury?
As you can see, there are 6 different tables within the Black Bear Casino's VIP room. 2 for blackjack, 2 for poker, 1 for craps, and 1 for roulette. There are 2 cameras positioned on each and every one table except for one in the center, which causes the blind spots due to remodeling done in 2014 and a placement of a fountain at the center of the room. Due to that replacement, we only have 1 camera on the blackjack table, which created the blind spots that we have there.
Let's talk about the next day with this information in mind. What were you doing in the early afternoon on the 16th of April?
I was in the camera room surveilling the events within the Black Bear Casino.
And what did you see on those cameras?
I saw Bancroft walk into the VIP room and go to the center table and place a briefcase within the blind spot I specifically told her. And I saw Covington follow her and place his briefcase in the same blind spot that I specifically told Bancroft, which I found extremely weird.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Okay. Cross-examination?
Cameron Wheeler for the defense, Your Honor. May I proceed?
You may.
You are Avery Bancroft's head of security, correct?
Yes, I am.
And for the meeting on March 31st, you were outside the door watching, correct?
In what context do you mean?
Sorry, you were outside the door supervising and ensuring the safety of the occupants, correct?
No, I tried to meet with Bancroft on March 31st, but she was nowhere in sight. But later that evening, I did run into Avery Bancroft and Hyde.
So you saw Devin Del Sesto appear with a cheese platter for the meeting, correct?
Yes, on April 13th.
On April 13th, you saw that.
Yes.
You know you were aware of the occupants inside being Mickey Keenan, Avery Bancroft, and Chase Covington,
And Hyde.
and Corey Hyde.
Yes.
Afterwards, on April 16th, after these meetings with Mickey Keenan, Corey Hyde, and Avery Bancroft, was when you first saw Bancroft walk onto the VIP room with a briefcase.
Yes.
You had not seen her do that before.
No, I've never seen her do that before.
And you never saw anything happen while they were in those blind spots, correct?
Could you repeat the question again?
You could not see anything that happened while they were in those blind spots.
No, I couldn't.
You have no way of knowing whether or not they swapped briefcases or anything like that.
I would not have any knowledge of that.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Any redirect?
No, Your Honor.
Thank you, Mr. Horn. Excuse.
Your Honor, the prosecution would like to call Dr. Warren to the stand.
Dr. Warren?
Can you just state your name for the record?
Francis Reese Warren.
Where are you currently employed?
I'm the Department Chair of Linguistics at Midland State University.
Can you please tell the court a little bit about your education?
I received my PhD from Georgetown University in linguistics, along with a cognitive study of forensic psychology. I also received my Bachelor's of Science degree in linguistics and English from the University of North Carolina, Charlotte.
Can you please tell the court about any research that you've conducted?
I've conducted research and taught in the field of forensic linguistics and its application to law. I've also published 37 peer-reviewed articles on the subject.
Dr. Warren, have you testified in court before?
Yes, approximately 23 times, all have been for the defense. This would be my first time testifying for the state.
So what is it that brings you here today?
I was contacted by Mr. Bancroft's attorneys. They wanted me to look into the alleged entrapment case. They paid me $10,000 for my initial analysis and report, but I was not asked to testify. I was then contacted by the state.
Dr. Warren, what materials were you given to review in regards to this case?
I was given a transcript of a conversation that occurred on the 31st of March, 2015, when the participants were Mr. Keenan, Mr. Hyde, and Ms. Bancroft. I also received an email exchange between Mr. Hyde and Mr. Keenan, along with affidavits for both Mr. Hyde and Mr. Keenan.
And what methods did you use for your analysis?
I used a transcript analysis, a topic content analysis, a contrastive analysis, and a response analysis.
Can you please tell the court a little bit about what a transcript review is?
A transcript review is basically when a linguist reads a conversation and finds any undue influences or deceit.
What is a topic content analysis?
A topic content analysis is when a linguist analyzes the flow of conversation throughout the conversation to make sure all the topics have been introduced and whether the participants go back to the topics or reintroduce more topics.
What is a contrastive analysis?
This is a method used to identify if any informants have been coached.
And lastly, what is a response analysis?
Response analysis is used to identify whether the participants agree with what has been previously said throughout the conversation.
Dr. Warren, did you apply all of these methods to this case?
Yes.
Are all of these methods reasonably relied upon in your field?
Yes.
And you used each of these methods specifically?
Yes, it is.
Your Honor, may I approach the bench to take tendered evidence? Sure. Thank you. May I please approach the witness? You may. Thank you, Your Honor. Dr. Warren, what have I just handed you?
You handed me a transcript of the conversation that occurred on March 31st, 2015.
And how did you apply your analysis to this document?
I first searched for open-ended questions using a transcript review.
Is that a positive method used by law enforcement?
Yes, open-ended questions are used to put the subjects on unequal footing and let them implicate him or herself in any crime in question.
Did you find any open-ended questions?
Yes, I did. One open-ended question would be, in line 18, what sort of amenities are you thinking? This opens up the conversation to the crime and allows the subject to implicate him or herself.
Were there any other examples of this?
Yes, on line 57, I believe. In line 38. Mr. Keenan says, "What are you willing to do to make this happen?" This is another open-ended question, but instead of just plain open-endedness, he drops subtle hints of the crime. This is exactly the type of behavior research has shown that law enforcement should use when under sting operations, undercover sting operations.
What else did you look for in this case?
I look for ambiguous language.
What does that mean?
Ambiguous language is basically when a subject answers open-ended questions with open-ended answers. They're sort of they're not in any way specific.
Did you find any?
None whatsoever.
What is something else that you looked for in this case?
I looked for coaching.
What does that mean?
Coaching is basically when an informant or a subject is being coerced to answer questions in a certain way, or to implicate him or herself in any kind of questions.
Was there any evidence of coaching in this analysis?
Yes, there was one instance of coaching between Mr. Keenan and Mr. Hyde.
Now, do you believe that this one instance of coaching is any reason to believe that entrapment occurred?
No, there were multiple more factors to show that entrapment could have occurred. This small instance of coaching is not enough to conclude that it occurred.
And other instances showed that entrapment did not occur?
Yeah, there are plenty of other instances to show that entrapment did not occur.
What is something else that you looked for in this case?
I look for reluctance.
What does that mean?
Reluctance is like in its name, is if the answer the subject gives are reluctant in nature. They hesitate or they tend to slow down their speech pattern. This is to show, to be not confident, which is they're unsure of their answers.
In your professional opinion, does Ms. Bancroft show any reluctance to the plan discussed in this transcript?
No. Ms. Bancroft's, all of her responses have been definitive. They're all to show zero reluctance. For example, I know in one line she says, "Great," or "Okay, I can do that." If I have this time.
Okay, what is something else that you looked for in this case?
I looked for lying.
Did either Keenan or Hyde use lying as a means of entrapment?
There was no evidence to show that Mr. Keenan or Mr. Hyde used lying as a method of entrapment.
Now, something that you mentioned before was a topic content analysis. Did you look for anything specific in this?
Throughout the topic content analysis, I looked for the flow of conversation. I actually when I did my analysis for Ms. Bancroft's attorneys, I provided a chart to analyze the first subject.
Your Honor, may the witness use a demonstrative? Sure. Thank you, Your Honor. Dr. Warren, can you please tell the court what we're looking at?
This is a chart that analyzes who controlled the conversation at what point during the conversation and what topics they introduced. So there were a total of seven topics throughout the entire conversation. Mr. Keenan introduced 3. Ms. Hyde introduced 3, and oh, sorry, Ms. Bancroft introduced 3, and Mr. Hyde introduced 1. So usually when the conversation is not overly controlled by law enforcement, this is one of the prime reasons why the result I listed in my report was inconclusive.
Thank you, Dr. Warren. Now, based on your analysis, what conclusions did you come to?
I could not come to a conclusion. My results were inconclusive.
Dr. Warren, can you tell us today, with any degree of professional certainty, that Miss Bancroft was entrapped?
No, I can't.
Thank you. No further questions. Cross?
Yes, Your Honor. Good morning.
Good morning.
I'd like to talk to you a little bit about the transcript that you talked about in your act, okay?
All right.
Now, this was a meeting between Bancroft, Keenan, and Hyde, isn't that right?
Yes, that is correct.
In this meeting, they brought up the bribe, correct?
Yeah, they hinted, dropping subtle hints. Mr. Keenan used open-ended questions and dropped subtle hints. This is exactly what we want to see in undercover sting operations.
Okay, well, I want to go through that a little bit. Now, in line 37, actually, it was line 35. Mickey Keenan's informant was the one to bring up sweetening the pot, right?
Yes, that is correct.
And Miss Bancroft, she didn't talk about a bribe then, did she?
No, she went straight to conference spaces.
And then Mickey Keenan, he replied saying, let's try this again. What are you willing to do to make this happen? Isn't that right?
Yes, this is one of the open-ended questions that I cited in my report.
And Miss Bancroft, she didn't bring up a bribe, did she?
No, not specifically.
Then Mickey Keenan, he came back and he said, you know that's not what I mean. Here in Midlands, it's not enough just to have a business plan. You have to go the extra mile. Isn't that right?
That is what Mr. Keenan said.
That's not an open-ended question.
No,
That's a statement.
it is a statement.
Even when Mickey Keenan said that, Miss Bancroft, she never talked about a bribe. Right?
Yes.
And then Keenan went even further and said, you need to pitch more than ideas. That's not an open-ended question, right?
No, it's a statement.
I want to talk to you about some of the analysis you did before coming to court today, okay? Now, you have a 10 best practices that you teach undercover cops, isn't that right?
Yes.
Now, these 10 best practices are what undercover cops should use when they are undercover.
Of course, we want to instruct our law enforcement to proceed legally in undercover sting operations.
Mickey Keenan actually failed to do 4 of these 10 best practices, right?
Yes. Failing before. But that, again, this is the reason why I cannot come to a conclusion.
And you were paid $10,000 to come here to give your conclusion?
I was paid by Ms. Bancroft's attorneys for my initial analysis of the report.
And you cannot say whether or not she was or wasn't entrapped.
I cannot say. I submitted that report before coming here, then I was not asked to testify on behalf of Ms. Bancroft. I was then contacted by the state.
Thank you. At this time, I have no further questions.
Any redirect?
No, Your Honor.
Thank you, Dr. Warren. You're excused.
Should I reach out to this?
Yes. Anything further from the prosecution?
Your Honor, the prosecution has no further witnesses.
Do you rest your case?
Yes,
Agent?
Your Honor.
Your Honor, before the defense begins their case in chief, we ask for a brief 5 to 10 minute recess.
Let's do 5 minutes.
Yes, Your Honor.